Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the career of law enforcement and everything in between. This is the Shots Fired podcast. I'm Kyle Schoberg, to my right is Mark Redlich.
We're going to peel back the layers of what it's really like to be in law enforcement. We're going to cover the good, the bad, and some of the ugly, and if this career is actually meant for you. So, generally, we don't share a lot of our personal stories on this platform, but I think this is a great opportunity where we can share some of those things that we've never talked about, from the application process all the way working solo in a car by yourself. I think we're going to cover a ton of good stuff in this that people really have never heard.
Yeah, you know, one thing we get a lot of, and we've always made this podcast not about us, and we've always stayed pretty true to that, and we've sprinkled in some stories here and there, and it seems like people enjoy them, but we get a lot of requests on social media, email, comments on YouTube, asking us a lot of questions, and it is very challenging to respond back to everybody. And then you got guys like Brody who complain because we're not doing long form podcasts.
Come on,
so
Brody.
Here we are. But seriously, there is value in it. We do a lot of these body cam breakdowns, and the reason we do that is because body cams are such a useful tool to debrief videos, and it really, for us at least personally, I think we're providing the educational piece to it, but we're also explaining to the public and being transparent with why cops make the decisions that they make, good or bad. And so I think it's gained traction. I think people enjoy that. Some people don't. I do want to give a shout out. Actually, we just did the video in Idaho from Ada County, and some of those deputies, or a deputy from that video, reached out to us and said he's been following us for a long time. And, so I think that kind of puts things in perspective for us, is like, when we're doing these videos, we have to be cognizant of, what we're saying and sharing. And, some of the people in these videos that they watch and see what we're putting out there. It's just like Donut Operator and some of these other, content creators. They're making these videos, and, people are going to see them. And so, not to go off on a tangent on that,
But you did.
I kind of did. And I'm going to reel it back in and go back to a lot of these questions that we get asked, and we haven't answered them in a long time. And so I think we can do that on an actual episode instead of individually getting back to people. To me, that it just kind of made more sense, right? So,
well, let's talk about the application process, because that's the initial one. Is what department should I work for? Sheriffs or police? What's the difference? Do I go to a big department or a small department?
yeah. And you and I both, so I started at a small agency, you started at a big agency. And I think the simplest answer for that is I truly, for me, I was 20 years old. I had little to no life experience on my own, still living at my parents. I was in college. I ended up getting hired somehow and got put into the academy. I'm thankful that I started at a small agency, because with no life experience, I felt like working at a smaller agency, it wasn't very busy. I kind of slowly developed that, just learning that on the job. I think if I would have started at a large agency, I don't know that it would have worked out for me very well, given that I didn't have that type of experience. Because when I did transfer later to a larger agency, it was a culture shock for me, and the call volume and dealing with the types of calls that, you deal with at a bigger city versus a smaller city. I'm not sure how I would have handled that as a 20-year-old. So if you're asking yourself, big, small, sheriff, city, you really just got to look at the culture of the department, I think, is the biggest thing. You got to look at other things other than, how, what's the money like? How busy is it? Culture is a huge thing, and you learn that over time. You don't understand that in the beginning, but, pay attention to who city council members are, board of supervisors, who is the chiefs, sheriffs, the administrators, do ride-alongs, pick brains of the officers or deputies, ask what the morale is like. What are the challenges those agencies face? Those are all things I think, if you're thinking about wanting to get in law enforcement and you're unsure of where you should work, I would play my hand into all of that.
I took all that into account for the most part, but I went to, my considerations were a larger agency with more opportunity and more, I guess, turnover in a way, where small agencies, you may have a couple officers or detectives working in positions, and they're going to be there for a while. So the opportunities are very limited. And when those opportunities come up, there's a lot of people competing for that. I decided to go to a larger agency that had different opportunities. And one specifically was a full-time SWAT team. That's what I wanted. And that was a commuting distance. There was many agencies between where I lived and the agency that I wanted to work for, but that was the agency, and it was a large one. I didn't want to work for a sheriff's office. I wanted to work for a police department, and that was just what I focused on. So I think it really depends on what your interests are, if they have the options and opportunities and the growth for you. But
Yeah.
small agencies are very nice too. You know, really nice neighborhoods, the nicer departments. Those are options too. And you may not want to get involved in a lot of stuff. You may want to do different things that help a community in a different way.
Yeah. I think, if you're unsure and you don't want to dive headfirst into some big metropolitan city or big agency, then go work at a small agency for a couple years, get your feelers for things. And if that agency doesn't have what you're looking for, then nothing is ever bounding you there. I mean, you can leave at any time, go lateral somewhere else, make sure you stay out of trouble. And that would be my best advice for choosing where you want to work.
Well, I think it's been almost 20 years. Actually, it might even be a little over 20 years from the first time I actually applied for an agency. And technology has grown a lot. And we know people that are in their early 20s have grown up with cell phones and technology and tablets and video games much more than when I was growing up. And their interest may be tech, and law enforcement is now having a large tech portion. So you may find an agency that has a really good tech program, and that's where you want to go. And you have no intentions of staying in patrol, which is totally fine because you want to get into that tech aspect. So I think there's a lot of different things to factor in today than 10 years ago.
Yeah, benefits, pay, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, you go through the hiring process. That's just something you gotta, you kind of figure it out along the way. Every agency is different. Their standards are different. You can't pinpoint it to one particular agency. Does it all the same? So
yeah, some require a college education, some don't. Some require degrees, some require a certain amount of credits. So I think the application process, you have to find the department that you want to work for, go online and actually submit an application for that.
Yeah, study the city, study the county, know the stakeholders. You need to walk into an oral board confident in a nice suit and be able to talk about yourself, your past experience, and why that agency should hire you. That's what you need to focus on, giving good, solid, concise answers.
Well, you're going to get that interview process. And we've actually done a video on how to interview and prepare for a police interview. And it is a skill set. I've sat on oral board interviews before, and it's really interesting. As soon as someone comes in and they first start talking, you already know if they have prepared and put thought into it or if they just showed up for it. So I would recommend putting a lot of thought into an interview, and it's simply thinking about how to formulate an answer of, this is the hardest question, is tell me about yourself. That's a hard question because you want to think, and if you're early 20s applying for this job, oh, I grew up here. No one cares about where you grew up. The reality is who are you? What are you doing? How can you contribute? And you have to phrase that question where when you answer it, you're giving a little lead in, and then you're talking about like the content of who you really are, what makes you who you are, and how you can benefit the agency. And then you have to bring that question to a close so the person across from the table from you clearly knows your answer is done. You can't just leave it's a skill set, but there are times when people answer a question and they just stop talking. And I looked at them like, are you done?
Yeah, they want to know, what value are you going to bring to our agency?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. The interview there's a lot involved in an interview.
Yeah. So moving past that, you get hired, you're going to, and it's time to start the academy, or maybe you don't even get hired by an agency and you're going to put yourself through the academy and then try to get hired after the fact. Either or, it's most people are 50-50. Obviously, it's always better to try to go get hired and then have them pay for you to go to the academy, but not everybody does that. So our best advice before you go to the academy, to me, it's simple. You need to be in good physical shape. You need to go out and start running and be open-minded to what you're going to learn in the academy. Some people try to really study up on laws and case law and penal codes and vehicle codes and all that. You don't know what exactly you're going to be learning in the academy, and you don't know like at what point of the academy different learning domains and all that stuff. So for me, I would say go in open-minded. I would rather be more physically in shape and fit than trying to study all that stuff. You're going to learn that in the academy along the way. And I would take one chunk at a time. Don't try to get ahead of yourself. Don't try to overstudy because you think you know what you're going to be learning next. Focus on the task at hand of what they're teaching you. Get through that, pass your test, and then move on to the next chunk. at the end of the day, you just need to pass the academy. Like,
Yeah.
I'll sit here and admit, I think I graduated like bottom of our class.
Nah, I think I was the bottom, dude.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there's no shame in that.
No.
Like, I'm not a good test taker. I've never really been good in school. It's not about that. It's just some of the things in the academy are a little goofy, and it's a process, and they do have standards, and so you just need to meet the standards, get through the academy. Don't try to overdo it. Some people like to just fly under the radar, and there's nothing wrong with that. And just graduate. That's all you need to do, because it doesn't matter that you and I graduated at the bottom of our class. We were very successful in our careers. That doesn't play a factor to me. So
Yeah,
there's some people that graduated at the top who failed FTO or quit within the first month.
Yeah.
So don't let that affect you. We had a couple people reach out to us, and they're like, "Hey, I'm struggling in the academy. I'm kind of falling behind. What advice can you give me?" And it was like, well, you need to just like focus on what your struggles are and just get past that, and don't try to do too much.
I think my thought is obviously we went through the academy, and the evolution of law enforcement academies have changed some, but the only thing you can really control is you being physically prepared to get in there. And I'm backing what you just said. You've got to be fit going in there. So then that's not something that's going to be difficult for you. You should be able to get through the academy physically without having that being a struggle where you're trying to physically recover, you're exhausted, you're sore all the time. That's going to distract you from your academics. In the academy, you're going to learn stuff. They're going to teach you specific things block by block through the academy. It's designed for you to learn things as you go. Like, the academy isn't something you can try to study laws and you're just wasting your time, to be honest. Like, it's a tried and true situation where you're learning block by block. So control what you can, which is your fitness, and then just study exactly what they're telling you. I would not try to extend more and try to study before it's going to distract you. And like we just said, I graduated at the bottom of the academy, and the only thing that affected me was when I signed up for my patrol shifts. But I actually signed up on a really good desired area with experienced officers because I had the least amount of seniority, and that only mattered for a couple of years. It didn't matter.
Yeah. So really, I guess that's our advice for those of you asking or what it's like to go to the academy. Don't overthink it. It is not that difficult. So what? You might get yelled at, and who cares? It's all a game. It's a mind game. Don't let that weed you out. And then the scenarios at the end of the academy are so basic. If you know a little bit about what you're doing, you should not have an issue. If you overthink it, if you can't manage an academy scenario, you are not going to be able to manage a real life scenario, because in the academy it's role playing. In real life, it's not.
Yeah. Oh, I would make one more recommendation. Remember when we started the academy? Right before the academy, you had to go through, and then you ordered everything. They shipped it to you, and then you had it ready to go. Well, they made recommendations of clothing and stuff. Well, when I went in, I saw that, and I was thinking, because I'm pretty analytical, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do laundry every day. So I actually bought double everything that they recommended, even the jackets, which that was
telling me that.
Yeah, I bought double. So then I have to do laundry every day, because your day is going to be consumed by the academy. You're going to have things to do in the evening. Then you're going to have to do laundry every night. Yeah, so I would recommend ordering more. Yeah, it is time consuming.
Don't do what I do and forget your PT shorts at home, and then have to ask the smallest, shortest person in our academy, who was a female, to borrow a pair of shorts and then run out on the track wearing booty shorts.
Yes.
Your instructors will call you out, and you will still have to run and look like an absolute idiot.
Yeah, I remember that, because it was cold and everybody had to dress exactly the same. And if it was freezing cold out and someone forgot their sweatshirt, nobody could wear a sweatshirt. And we all wanted to wear sweatpants, but you didn't even have those. And
I foobarred that.
Yeah, that was
really I think my
funny.
Butt cheeks were hanging out of those shorts. That was embarrassing.
Well, you were the tallest one. That was funny. That was super funny.
Yeah. Anyways.
All right. So you graduate the academy, and then now you're going to your agency.
Yeah, you're starting field training. That's where the stress is going to kick in. I think FTO is it is difficult. It is designed to be stressful for a reason. Standards have changed in law enforcement here in 2025. It's not anything, I don't think, what it was like when you and I started FTO back in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
Treated a little bit differently, I think, and you were allowed to back then. Now things are a little bit different, so it doesn't matter. Like, the learning is the same. The calls were the same then than they are now. You're still dealing with people.
Yeah.
And so I think as far as being on FTO, my strongest or best advice to everybody who asks is just be a really good student. Do not be afraid to make mistakes, because the second you try not to make mistakes or you start overthinking things because you think you're making mistakes, you're going to start circling the drain. It's so hard to bounce back from that because you're just so focused and so concerned about not doing something wrong because maybe you just goofed up on something else and you can't get out of that thought that you're being judged or graded. I just see people just slowly like not recover from that.
I saw it when I graduated too. It was a couple people just OODA looped and got worse and worse, and they are just completely stressed out. And you're right, there's going to be eyes on you by everybody, and they're all judging you. But the reality is nobody wants anybody to fail.
No.
But when you don't take ownership of something, won't admit something's wrong, or you need help with, or you don't understand, and you try to make it like you do, people notice that, and then they start thinking like, I don't like that. I'm not, they don't want to ask for help. I'm not going to help. So I think you should always be asking for help constantly. Yeah. Hey, I'm interested in this. I want to go to that call. How do we handle this? You should be constantly, if you're sitting in a car with your FTO and you're not asking questions, there's a problem. You should be constantly running questions by. That's what the FTO is there for.
Yeah. And when your FTO tells you you may have did something wrong or you could have done something different, the worst thing to do is come up with an excuse. I've seen so many trainees where they have an excuse for everything. And it's like, dude, I'm not looking for an excuse. I'm just telling you, like, you did this wrong and this is how we should be doing it.
Yeah.
I don't need an excuse. Even if you think you have an excuse, maybe you think you're right and your FTO is wrong, keep it to yourself.
In most agencies, the FTOs want to be an FTO. They want to help people learn. Like, they want that responsibility. So they're there to help you. Ask questions. That's what I would.
It is going to be stressful. It is what it is. You need to get through that, 4, 6, 7 months of training. As long as you're moving on to the next phase and you're passing the tests and things that you need to do to get from phase 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, then there's light at the end of the tunnel. You're doing something right. And as long as you're bumping forward, you should be good to go. It's when you start getting held back, your phases start getting extended, then you need to start paying attention as to what it is that's holding you back so you can move past that. But I don't really think you actually, I don't want to say like you don't learn the job. You definitely learn the job when you're on training. That's not what I want to say. But I think when you become a solo cop, for me at least, I felt like, okay, the pressure's off. I'm not being freaking judged all day long while I'm at work. Not only by your FTO, but like your peers too. Like other officers are judging you as well. Even your supervisors. Now they're not going to tell you that because they're not supposed to. It's supposed to come from the FTO. But you can definitely believe that the way you conduct yourself, handle calls, make decisions or not make decisions, everybody around you is judging you.
Yeah.
And I felt like when I was solo, that weight was lifted off my shoulders and I performed better. I felt like I just kind of got into my groove when I became a solo cop. And that's where I really felt like I started to learn how to be a cop, if that makes sense.
Well, I think yes.
Because when you're on FTO, you're basically trying to conform to who your FTO is.
Totally. You're sitting in a car with them. You do what they want.
Exactly.
You're intermixed with their routine. And like at that point, you have a partner, but you don't have that relationship and you don't have the skill set to be a good partner. You're just trying to learn the job. So you're right. I think when you're in a car with the FTO, if they want to eat, when they eat, if they eat out, because if they don't, the
music they listen to or don't listen, like,
yes, all of that.
And sometimes you're like, you move on to another FTO and they're like, all right, you need to do things this way because that's the way they do it. And then you're thinking to yourself like, well, my other FTO just literally told me the opposite. It doesn't matter. Just do it the way that they tell you to do. And when you're on your own, do it however you want to do it.
Yeah.
So
I remember sitting in a car with a guy that all he wanted to do was eat out. That's it. We ate out everywhere and it sucked because I didn't want to eat out. And then another FTO, all he did was bring his food. So I always had to bring my food. And if I didn't bring food, then we'd have to stop and he wasn't happy about it. But when you get in a car by yourself, everything changes because now you make your own decisions. Mm-hmm. You stop where you want to stop. You take the street you want to. You come to the back of the station. You stop at a coffee shop. You get food. Like it's
just driving where you want to drive.
Totally.
Like,
or not driving.
Wherever you want to go.
Yeah. It is way different. And that's the weight that you don't realize that you have of now you're in control. And then that's where like the learning really happens. But I do want to mention really quick that becoming an officer is a difficult process to get out onto your own. that's the benefit is there are agencies that have the CSO, the community service officers, where you go through the same academy, but you come out and you're a community service officer, and then you're only responding to lower level report calls, burglaries, car accidents,
like cold calls.
Yeah. And you can gain a lot of experience that way. Getting comfortable with the computer systems, the navigations, the car, you get to build relationships with report the actual writing. Officers, the report writing. And then you have the option at some agencies to upgrade to an officer, and you are already above the standard when you start as an officer. So there's different routes you can take. There's nothing wrong with starting. In fact, I almost think that's a better process is becoming a CSO.
Yeah, I think it just depends on your life experience. Maybe for me as a 20-year-old, that probably would have been a better route. But I remember being on FTO back then. It was like your FTO smacking you upside the head. He's cussing at you. I don't see that probably happening today, especially with body cams and in-car cameras. I mean, you're probably going to get in trouble for that as an FTO. But
I had an FTO that I would sit in the car, and he changed right next to me in the locker room. There'd be on a Tuesday, I'd be like, "Hey," I'm not gonna say his name, but I'd say, "Hey, what's up?" Would look at me and not say a single word. The entire shift would not talk to me, and then the next day,
I don't like that.
I don't either. It's not acceptable. But the next day, super cool. He was up and down. I had another FTO that I was not allowed to get out of the car. Like I literally had to ask to get out of the car. So we'd sit at the end of the shift with everybody, and I couldn't get out of the car. It's just the way they are. Like, hey, you're a trainee. That's where you are. You're going to earn your way, and they had to earn their way.
Yeah, and back then, I guess that was the culture of it, and that's how you were treated. But now, looking back, I don't really, and I could be wrong, and someone's probably going to put in the comments why, but I don't see a benefit to that. I really don't. Like, you're trying to groom this person to be your partner, to be out there working with you hand in hand. And if you're in a bad situation, like that person might be with you one day. So I don't get the whole like, don't speak unless spoken to. You're not allowed to come in and have lunch with us. Like, I kind of get it, but you're earning your right or respect or whatever. But anyways, I don't know. It's just
I rode with one guy for a week. Because my FTO was off work on vacation, so I rode with him, and his name was Ryan, and he was the only person that treated me like a partner. And it was a total different experience. Like I felt like I learned much more that 1 week than I did with all the other FTOs because I felt like he treated me like a partner. Like we were one and not separated. But FTO is a whole different process to go through.
And every agency is different. Yeah. Jinx.
Okay, so what's after FTO process? You get out on your own,
well,
right?
We put down here in the notes, you become a solo cop. So when you become a solo officer, I think, so today in 2025, things are so much different. The standards back then were year 1 to year 5, just be a really good patrol cop. And I still wholeheartedly believe in that. Be a really good patrol cop. That's where you're going to learn everything, go out, make mistakes, not purposely, but you are going to make mistakes, learn from them. And I think you really kind of start to navigate where do you want to go in your career? What excites you? Is it traffic? Is it you want to be a tactical guy? Do you want to be a canine guy? Do you want to be a detective? There are so many different facets in law enforcement that you can go into. And I truly think within that window of time, I think that's when you kind of start to figure out what it is that you want to do. And some guys, it's just patrol, and that's totally fine. But nowadays, people are getting picked up as FTOs and into specialties with 2 years on. And I think we did an episode, maybe it's been a couple years now, but it was like, I think I laughed at that. And I'm like, nope, you need to have, minimum 5 years on to do anything. And I guess the reality is, and I'm seeing it across the nation when we go and do trainings, is that agencies don't have that luxury anymore. Like, I think post-COVID, departments are really trying to play catch up with hiring and getting back up to full levels of staffing. And that takes an incredible amount of time. We talked about it earlier. I'll just hit on it. Like one cop to hire one person to be a full-time officer solo by themselves, from the day you apply to the day you get off training, that's damn near a 2-year window right there.
Yeah.
For one position.
Yep.
Now you're not even talking about everyone that fails out, quits the academy. Now you're starting all over again. Like I see it time and time again. So to fill 5 vacancies, that could take years. And so the reality is, if you're one of those people and you're like, die hard, nope, you need minimum 5 years to do this, I can't say I agree with that anymore. I think we're in a time now where that's just not the standard anymore. And so people need to just be understanding of that. And, if you're going to pick someone up with 2-3 years on and you're going to make them an FTO, you better make them successful, because now that's the generation training the generation below them coming into law enforcement. And so do I agree with it? No, I can't say I agree with it, but that's where we are right now. And if you're one of those people who have 2-3 years on and you're being shoulder tapped to put in for FTO or put in for a specialty, take advantage of that, I guess, because I guess at the end of the day, like, those positions need to be filled. And I think there are people who don't have a lot of time on, but they are good cops. They are qualified. I'd rather that person go slide into one of those positions than someone who has the same amount of time on, but not nearly up to speed. And those people are like, well, I'm going to take advantage of that and I'm going to put in. And now it's like, well, shit, that's all we have to choose from. And so that person gets selected over maybe somebody that could have done it but held back. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that, but it kind of depends on the person, their life experience. When I say the life experience, like, what were you doing before law enforcement? I started when I was 25. So I had 7 years of different type of jobs to gain life experience. You came right into it. So
7 different Starbucks as a barista.
Well, you got to skip around. I mean, day shift, night shift. I mean, come on, geez. Bottling water company, all kinds of different interesting jobs I'll get into one day. But your life experience plays a factor too, because you may be one that interviews early on in your career, 2-3 years on, to become a sergeant. And there are people that argue you don't have street experience and you do need experience of how to handle certain situations. But there's other career paths that you can go where you can learn and develop skills. Like, you could go into detectives, or the tech side, or the drone portions, or real-time crime centers, and you can go into those career paths and learn a whole different avenue. And there are agencies where you have a 5-year cap of a detective, and then you rotate back to patrol. The benefit I see of that is you have now gained all this experience to now handle a call even more thorough. Like, you recognize different things being a detective, and then you bring that back, and then now you're an FTO. Like, the people riding with you gain a lot of experience. It's about life experience.
I just think how it depends how you look at it. That's a great point. Like, you could take that experience, bring it back to the streets. Yeah,
well, think about your first 10 burglary, your residential burglary reports. I can think about mine, and I put a ton of effort into it, not knowing. All I do is submit that report. I don't know what happens after. So after a while, I omit things and I don't put other things in, and no one says anything. And detectives are getting these reports thinking like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Did they do a canvas? Why didn't they canvas? Why didn't they mention the canvas that there was surveillance? Or if there was surveillance, did they leave a note to say contact police? Like, as a patrol cop, sometimes you don't know that stuff. And I almost think that's the benefit of roll calls, where detectives should be coming in a roll call explaining the process, because I didn't understand what happened after a report until I went and met detectives and actually sat with them and learned. I mean, I think if you're any agency, detectives should be taking the opportunity to sit in a roll call, because somebody's working at that time, and say, hey, here's a domestic violence report. Here's a stolen car report, a burglary, a robbery. Here's things that we're looking for and why.
Yeah. Something that stood out to me that now that you say that was going to a homicide scene, and it was a pretty brutal homicide. It was a juvenile female who got brutally beaten to death. And it was like my first week there at the agency. And I remember the detectives coming into briefing afterward, because when we did do the neighborhood canvas to see if any neighbors heard anything, when the neighbors were like, no, I didn't hear anything, that got like dismissed in my eyes, because I'm like, well, okay, cool, you didn't hear anything. Move on to the next. I'm looking for the person that did hear something, the screaming or whatever. Well, when a later detective did come back into briefing and was like, hey, it is just as important to document and to talk to people who didn't hear things than it is for the person that did hear things. That, I don't know why that always stuck with me, but it did. And so I agree, little things like that, by going into briefings and sharing that information with the patrol cops, is going to make the patrol cop a lot better. So I always took that as like, wow, shit, I never thought about that. Like, yeah, I guess them not hearing something is equally as important as the person who says they did hear something, based on where they're located, where were they at in their house. Taking all those detailed notes is like vitally important as a patrol cop, because once you're there and you get all that stuff, like it's really hard to go back and do that again. And so,
Well, I think that's
yeah, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is law enforcement is different today in 2025, and standards have lowered, and people that are rolling out into these positions have a lot less experience, and agencies have to adapt to that. And not only do they have to make do with it, but they need to make sure that their employees are set up for success and make the best of it.
Well, I think that's what we talk a lot about, training and why training is so important. And these are free opportunities internally. You can provide training to your cops. Roll calls. I mean, I'm going back to that because it's so huge. Departments really should be emphasizing the watch commander, the lieutenant, and the internal affairs sergeants, internal affair investigators, the lieutenants that work in internal affairs should be coming and making a regular presence in law enforcement, obviously, but in roll calls, in educating people, the officers that are in there, because the patrol level, the people that are in roll calls are the ones that generate the complaints. They generate the first level of reports. They respond to the first call. That's the people that need the most training. And you don't have to go out externally to get good training. There's a lot of experience internally. We just need to promote that within and have people come to roll calls and continuously talk about that stuff. That's how people get better.
Yeah, totally agree.
I can't drop this mic, but I feel like I could.
Just boom.
Yeah.
Don't football spike this thing, dude.
I'd like to see that in more roll calls. So
no, I agree with you, and it's shit. I mean, I'm still in law enforcement, and thinking back, like I'm in a specialty team, you know, like we don't really go to roll calls, and so I'm actually going to make it a point to.
Well, think about when you used to sit in roll calls. All I ever wanted to do was have a SWAT guy come in and talk about what happens and leads up to a SWAT call out. Like, what could I do? Yeah. Or I've always wanted a detective come in and talk, and that never happened. But you have the opportunity right now with the unit that you're in and the team that you run.
Yeah.
You know those patrol cops would be stoked if you came in there and be like, listen, this is what I want from you. You know, they're going to do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And if you're listening to this and you're in some type of specialty or whatever it is, like try to make it a point to pop into a briefing here and there. It doesn't have to be all the time because I know people get busy, but making it somewhat of a priority to do it every so often, I think is widely beneficial for everybody. So, all right, I want to hit on relationships and, you know, becoming a cop and making that your identity. And as you know, if you weren't already married or in a relationship prior to being one, and you get into some type of relationship as a cop, not making that your identity, which I think a lot of guys do. And I say guys because I see it more in males than you do females.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you were married. You were at least together with your current wife before you guys went to the academy. You guys been together since high school?
Yeah.
And I think a common theme in law enforcement is divorce rates are very high. And, you know, people always ask, like, is that true? And the reality is it is true. Like, I'm divorced. I've got kids. And I just want to say, like, if I could offer anybody advice who's either in law enforcement, I don't know, fire, like whatever, some type of first responder capacity, you know, going and hanging out with your buddies at work all the time, I don't find that to be healthy. I think hanging out with your buddies from work is okay to do here and there in maybe group settings, or maybe you've identified a really good friend at work. You know, like I can name a couple right now that I've just been friends with throughout my career, worked together a lot, and I can go hang out with them and their families and not just make it about work. Like, it's just a true friendship. But I think if you're going out with your buddies and you guys are socializing, having a beer, whatever, and all you're doing is talking about work, it's like mentally draining on yourself, and I don't think you realize it. But then if you're introducing your spouse or significant others into these environments, and that's all you're doing, like, I'm telling you, it's a turnoff to the females, because that's not what they want to be hearing when they go to hang out with you and your buddies. So I think why maybe divorce rates or relationships maybe don't last in law enforcement is, I think that's a component of it. And then I think because you've made this your identity and all you want to be known as is like this awesome cop, it draws you away from your family life. You know, if you have kids, and the reality is like dude, the hours suck in this job. Like, there is no way around it, you know? And it is still wild to me when you get young cops that get hired into this job and they think they shouldn't have to work nights, weekends, holidays. You are getting into a career where that is going to happen. Like, being a cop, being in law enforcement, it's 365 days a year, 24/7. It never ends. So I said it before the show, so like you don't work at a bank, you know, or a job where it's like I start at 9 and I'm off at 5. A bank isn't going to go, oh, we need to stay open an extra 2 hours,
No.
you know, to let people cash their checks. No, it closes at 5 p.m. It's done. You're going home. Where in this career, like, you're not. And some people struggle with that, you know, or you get into a specialty where you're getting called in to work in the middle of the night often, which is in the case that I'm in now. And you were being on a full-time SWAT team, you know, and being dedicated to that assignment, like, your spouse has to be on board with that. Otherwise, it's just going to cause a lot of friction, and the communication piece, I think, is going to break down. And I just don't see it working. And I personally think, looking back on prior relationships, like, that's why things don't work out. It's very hard to manage. But I think what it boils down to is, don't make this job your identity.
I think the identity part is very true. And it's hard to not make that your identity because you're usually young. It affects you're talking about the academy, which forces your daytime hours, your evening hours, your weekends of studying. So it becomes everything through the academy. And then now you get into FTO and it becomes everything. So you're talking at least a year of that being your entire life. And then you go out on your own and then it's like, oh my gosh, you're sharing these stories. And I like the fact that you point that you shouldn't really focus on talking a bunch of cop stories outside of work, because some of the best cops that I know, the ones I look up to, that most respectful, were never the bros. They were never the ones that were like cop full time. You could tell they're cops off. They were not those people.
Mm-hmm.
And with the relationship aspect, it is hard because boundaries are different in law enforcement. Well, in any job, but you see a lot more in your mindset changes and things that were, okay, this isn't acceptable. You're now seeing that and you're going to people's homes and your boundaries just naturally change. It's how far are you allowing those boundaries to change? And you work with the same people over and over. You experience interesting things with them, not just visual, but physiological, like being in fights, emotions. And those people are next to you, helping you get through that, or you're helping them. You're listening to people on the radio. There's just a different bond with this type of work. And that's where the boundaries come into play, is you have to hold those boundaries. And I think outside of work, not telling all those stories is very important, because when you do start telling those stories, it becomes about you and your significant other, girlfriend, boyfriend. They're not telling their story. So you come home and you're like, naturally, hey, how was your day? Well, maybe your girlfriend is an accountant. Well, they could have had an incredibly stressful day and transposed some numbers and just had a miserable day at work. But they may kind of share that story, but then you're going to come in and share a law enforcement story, which is way different. And then that overshadows. So
I was going to say, yeah, it overshadows.
Yeah, I think trying to keep you got to talk about some stuff that's just healthy, but I think having that boundary, and some of the most successful people I've seen have had those boundaries.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned the bro thing. It's funny because, like, you see it in the military community, right? Like the bro vet or whatever. And like law enforcement's the same. Like, you do have those bro dudes. And yeah, I agree. Like, I've never been that guy. Like, if you run into me off duty, like, you would never know what I did, you know, for a career. You know, I didn't showcase it. I didn't dress like it. I didn't act like it. I'm not running around wearing 5'11" pants. You know, just the typical cop attire, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm wearing freaking Vans, jeans, and a freaking t-shirt, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I was also never one of those guys who, I never felt like I needed to go hang out with a bunch of dudes and like share war stories. Like, I've got them. I've got plenty of stories, you know, to share, that some I'm proud of and some I'm not proud of, you know, depending on the circumstance. But yeah, I agree with you in that the dudes who don't act like that, I think, tend to be more successful. People respect them more.
Yeah.
If you're the person who has to share those stories, and especially in like a group setting, you're probably full of crap anyways. And you know, how
you're
often do you see it?
covering.
Yeah, like how often do you see it where maybe you go to a class or whatever and you hear someone speak up and they're like, yeah, I've done this, this, and this, or I've been in X amount of shootings, or whatever. And you're like, okay, like bragging about it. And then you should always be careful about what you say in a class full of other cops, because odds are somebody knows somebody.
Yeah.
And then, you reach out to a buddy and you're like, hey, do you know so-and-so? Yeah. Hey, he says he's, been in blank amount of shootings. Like, is that true? And they're like, no, he's never been in one.
Yeah.
People steal other people's stories. Like, that's not an uncommon thing in law enforcement.
Well, the bro thing, like, if you're
just
wearing
be careful about it.
a Punisher shirt, like, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I've just never been into that. And people are, and you should be proud of what you do for work. I was very proud, but
what is it, like the grunt? What is that, like grunt? I don't even know what it is.
I think that's like
military.
See,
I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know. I had some stuff. I did wear some stuff, but I tried not to. My demeanor and my haircut clearly showed and demonstrated that I was a cop.
Yeah, I have to tell you to get a haircut sometimes, dude. And then you go to Supercuts.
I've never been to I have. I go to an actual barber.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. I will take you next time, and they'll look at you and be like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah.
Well, I think.
Yeah. Anyways,
outside of work, being successful, there's a lot more to this. It is a job. It's hard because you do take it home and you go right back to work. You take it home, you go right back to work. But
yeah, don't embarrass yourself. That like, it is embarrassing. I think it's embarrassing for the guys who aren't like that. Who actually are like good mentors. Like, don't wear that crap. Don't get those tattoos. Don't let that be your identity. You should be, Mark the husband, Kyle the dad. Whatever it is that your life is at home, that's your identity, not being a cop.
It's hard though. I mean,
I know it's hard, but that's
easily
why
get sucked into
that's
it.
why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we've experienced it.
Yeah. I was guilty of it.
Probably guilty of it at one point, and now looking back, we learn from that. And now being older, I've been in the career 19 years, like, you see younger guys doing it and you're like, you kind of look dumb. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, it's not healthy. You'll look back, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. So that's all.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do as a young cop. And the reality is like, you're proud of what you do. So I totally understand that, but don't overdo it.
Yeah.
That's all. So take that for what it's worth.
I think we have one last thing on our list.
Yeah. We want to talk about training versus real life and the social media experts out there. We gotta be nice about this. So,
well, I'm an advocate for training, and
obviously we both are. We work for a training company.
Yeah, should be seeking as much training as you can, finding as many different agencies and going out. But I think it's important to vet those agencies, where you're getting this information from, and not just vet who the companies are, but who the trainers are and what subjects are they actually teaching. Because there is a lot of times I've sat through a class where the person instructing is very well diverse in reading, and that's the material that they're getting is from what they've read, not what they've done.
Yeah, I think social media has played such a huge role in marketing training companies, individual people who are putting stuff on their platforms, claiming to be an expert in whatever it is that they're putting out. And so I think social media has become such a huge platform for that. And we have our own social media, whatever. We don't even post a whole lot on there, but I do see and take note of these other law enforcement social media platforms they will remain nameless. Some of them have very large followings, and it almost seems like they put stuff out like blanket, like they're just trying to be experts in everything. And then when you like dive into people's backgrounds and stuff, it's like, hey, do you even really know what you're talking about when you're putting this stuff out there? Because when you do have a large following, like, that is a responsibility, because the information you're putting out, some of those people are taking that as gospel, and what you're saying, they think to be true. And like an example, I saw a post recently, and it was about, cops being involved in shootings and either red dot sight stuff or, cops being in shootings and shooting with one hand. And it was kind of like dogging on cops that get shootings with one hand, and like, why are people doing that? And I couldn't help myself. I don't ever engage in back and forth banter on social media. It's not worth it. But I can't help but think to myself, like, you've never been in a shooting in real life. Like, you can't sit there and say, why are cops being in OISs or officer involved shootings and firing with one hand and not two? because you never experienced it. And so
Well, I think that's
you and
where
I talked about it. Yeah, but you and I talked about it. And I'm like, dude, look at this. Like, I don't agree with this, right? And then people start leaving comments on there about bashing. And there was like body cam clips of like cops being in shootings with one hand. I'm here to tell you, I've been in multiple shootings, and I can think on the top of my head, at least 2 of them, I did shoot with one hand, because that was the circumstance that was being presented to me when I'm being shot at, and I'm trying to seek cover and be as small as I can and also shoot at the same time. I shot with one hand, and it was still effective. You said you were too.
My shooting, I shot the guy with one hand because I had to hold him at gunpoint, and then at one point I needed to get on the radio, and as soon as I clipped the radio, that's when the opportunity presented itself, and I had to protect myself. So it's like my shooting was one-handed. It's just, and I think that's interesting when people talk about certain things that they haven't been involved in. And I think that's the credibility portion, and having an understanding of, I can talk about this, or maybe I shouldn't talk about this. I could talk about that, but maybe pose some questions or make some recommendations or ask for people's input, so you're soliciting more information. I'm not an advocate for someone saying this is how you do something when they've never actually gone down that path. There's different ways to provide that training without actually being involved in something like that.
Nothing is black and white, especially in this career. The word never doesn't exist and always doesn't exist. Like, nothing's black and white. And so putting out information like that, and as if like you should be doing things this way when really you've never even been in that situation, it's like, how can you even say that? So I guess the point is, full circle.
Well, I want to add to that circle before you complete it.
Go ahead.
Okay. I've seen other stuff on specific tactics, and it's like computer generated demonstrations of people making room entries from an aerial view. And it's like, I watch this and think, I don't know, man, you're exposing yourself to the side or your back, or your partner's exposed, and like your job is entering a room with your partners to protect each other. And it's just like different mindsets in training. And watching some of these computer generated things of training of aerial views of how to make entry into homes, it's hard to watch that, because it's like there are cops that are watching this and mimicking that, and there's certain things that are not correct, that are going
realistic,
or not realistic. I think that's even a better way to phrase that. And you're going to leave your partner exposed, potentially could be harmed. Not saying that I know everything, but certain things I know more about than others.
So why I thought about this, I actually don't even listen to a whole lot of podcasts. Quite frankly, I just don't have time. But I did yesterday, and I was listening to the Black Rifle Coffee Company podcast, which I don't listen to quite often because, again, I don't like to go down the rabbit hole of the whole bro thing. But Matt Best happened to be a guest on there. Are you familiar with Matt Best?
A little bit.
Okay. So he's kind of fallen off YouTube. He was one of the kind of original military funny guy, made videos and stuff and whatever. Anyways, I'm listening to this podcast between Matt Best and Evan Hafer, the owners of Black Rifle Coffee Company. And I was actually glad he brought this up. And he said, he sees this stuff online, guys talking about like the perfect form of holding a rifle, and how like if you're not doing it this way, like, you're doing it wrong or whatever. And he broke it down, and he's like, dude, it looks cool on camera. He's like, but the reality is like, that's not like reality, right? Like if I'm going into a room and I'm like doing a C-clamp on a rifle, shouldered up and holding that position, like you're going to be fatigued. You're going to get tired. Are you training like to look cool, or are you training based on what's going to be reality for you? And the reality is you're probably training to look cool and not what's actually reality. And so sometimes it's like, should we dumb things down and train it what we know is going to be reality? And it's not always going to be perfect form, shooting center mass on a target, using your red dot sight. So I don't know. They had that conversation on that podcast, and I was like, wow, that's actually, I'm glad he actually said that, because not too many guys are willing to admit that. When you go through social media and you see all these dudes doing all this like crazy, sexy, like fancy maneuvers, and they're like perfect form all the time. In real life, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I remember going through FBI SWAT school, and then a year of training internally with our team, and the thousands of entries I made to understand how to actually enter a room through the threshold of a door before I could even make entry during a real life operation. over and over, and you learn like the fundamentals of how it's done it's like ingrained in you, the process. But once you understand the process and you keep doing it, it kind of changes for each person, because my body's different than the other person going through a door with a smaller person versus a larger person. So having that same thought of it has to be picture perfect every time, I can understand the initial training process. But if you were to do that over and over and over, it's going to change. And part of that is your comfort in understanding that I can't keep my nor am I going to keep my left arm locked out in a room entry. Just not going to do it.
With your shoulders up, with all your gear.
Not going to do it.
Yeah, you can't do it. Like, you're going to get fatigued.
And not only that, I'm presenting 3 feet of my arm, and how do I maneuver a rifle? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, how many times are you stuck on something where it's like, you know, take a barricade for an example, or, you know, you're just like posted with your rifle and you're like, oh my God, my shoulders are dying. It's 100-something degrees outside. Like, you're going to look for ways to cheat, because that's the only way you're going to be able to sustain it long enough to even be effective. And so, you know, whether it's like posting your rifle on the hood of a car or the roof or like whatever, like, you're going to find a way to cheat it. And so I like, those are kind of discussions that aren't really ever had.
Well, it's having
in
the
training.
Right. But I think that's where it goes back to like the fundamentals. If this is exactly what, or position, or how I need to get there, but what happens in the middle? Okay, I'm going to cheat, or I'm going to relax. And that is part of your training, is I'm not going to hold up here. I'm going to hold down lower or off to the side, or keep my elbow up, or whatever it is that you're doing. Then if something happens, you can get back to that principle. That's like the transitions, but that's where practice comes from. And the reality is most street cops don't do a ton of reps over and over and over and over and over to get to that. So that's where you see some of this.
Yeah, I appreciate guys with that level of experience, who have experience and the credibility to be able to share, like, hey, yeah, that shit looks cool, but that's not reality. And you should probably bring your training back down to reality, and not what you think you should be doing because someone said you should be doing it who's never actually done it before. That's all.
Yeah.
So just pay attention to that stuff. If you see this stuff online, and look, I'm not even sitting here saying we're the end all be all. We're not.
Yeah.
But we also tend to stay in our lane, and like, we only do talk about things that we have experience. So if we're talking about something, it's not because we read it online or saw it in a book or in a video. No, we actually experienced it probably multiple times, and we're just feeding you that information. So just be cautious of that stuff. Perfection, I guess, is the word. You're never going to be perfect.
No, but I think that's where the reps come in. But I hope we've done a decent enough job today, like really describing.
I have one last question for you before we end.
What's that?
I have one last question for you before we end.
Oh, well, I'd like to answer it.
And don't make this too long-winded.
Well,
do you think?
Can you ask it simple where it makes sense?
I'm going to. Do you think law enforcement is a business or a family?
Ask that again. What?
Is it a business or a family? You know how they say, like, oh, brotherhood, sisterhood, we're all brothers and sisters. We're one big family. I hear what you're saying.
That's a freaking good question. And
knowing what you know now, with your experience.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, is I did not have any time to prep for this. He just sprung this on me. And I like that question. And by me talking like this right now is an interview technique, because this is called a preamble, and I'm not really thinking about what I'm saying. I'm thinking about what I should be saying.
Just
so
you know,
that's part of the interview process and the skill set of preambles and understanding and thinking and repeating a question. But it is a business. The problem is that the leadership and the culture, not leadership, I'm going to retract that and say the culture of law enforcement, people make it a relationship. And that's the problem, because it is not a relationship. It's a business. It's a job that you go to, but people make it a relationship, and it blends, and that's why it gets complicated. Law enforcement is a business. It doesn't evolve like it should, but I think it is starting to evolve. The relationship portion is with yourself and your home life, and I think you have to keep it separate. What do you think?
I agree. I'm glad you said that, because I totally agree. I think you hear all the time how law enforcement's a family and we're all brothers and sisters, and I'm not trying to like be negative, but the reality is it's not, right? Like, we're coworkers. We show up to work every day. We work with each other. Oftentimes you probably never see that person outside of work. And so, can you be friends at work? Yeah, absolutely. But it is a business, and the higher up the food chain you go in leadership roles, is you do understand more of budgeting and decisions are going to be made based on budgets. And so when you talk about money and budgets and stuff, then it does become a business. And that's the way it has to operate, right? It's not a free for all. Like there's not millions and millions of dollars to just spend money wherever you want. And I think sometimes we do ourselves a disfavor in this career because we do claim it to be this family. And so when you start telling people that and you start feeding employees that, then they start to think that it is. And then when they want to do something or, maybe go to a class or something that would benefit them to make them think that, well, they're going to say yes, because why wouldn't they? Like, we're a family, and you get told no. That's when I think morale starts to go down and people start really questioning that. And so I think if you just have to have the mindset that, look, it is a business. It's all good. And you're collecting a paycheck every 2 weeks. You should show up to work, give it 110%, have great safety, be there for one another. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you walk out of those doors every day and you get in your car and you drive home, that's what you're doing. You're going home, and that, like you said, like that's where your identity is.
Yeah.
And so don't get stuck on this whole, we're family and brothers and sisters. Like I don't believe that to be true. And I think the quicker you realize that, I think the more satisfied you will be at work, because when you do get told no, you'll understand it better.
Yeah, that is actually a really good point, because it's not personal, it's a business.
Totally. Not personal at all.
Well, I'm glad you interrupted me when I was trying to end this, because that was actually a really good way to end this. I appreciate that. That was a solid question.
Which goes against Mr. Beast's advice for all YouTube videos, and that's when you're going to end something, just end it and don't drag it on, because people are going to start clicking off, which hurts watch time hours and all that. So that's all nerdy stuff that you don't care about.
Yeah, I do care about it, because you care about it.
Anyways.
Because I care about you.
I think we answered a decent amount of questions. It was a longer form podcast today.
Yeah, I had a good time. That was good. I'm glad we did that. A lot of people made that recommendation that we should talk about that. I'm glad we did.
Yeah, let us know in the comments, guys, if you have a particular topic you'd like us to discuss. I think we should do an episode on alcohol, drinking, what law enforcement, your behaviors outside of the job. Those are all, I think, important topics that we can definitely talk about. So
yeah,
let us know in the comments what you guys want to hear, and we'll happily do that. So that's it for today's video, guys. We will catch you later, and thanks for watching.
Stay safe and be smart.